one of the things
Correct.
that just came up that I don't even know if some of this stuff is for real or if these are like trolls. I think some of these are this is like real people. But as you know, Peter Coles is the language master, and he's,
Yeah.
you know, of course, always fielding comments of like, "Hey, how come you don't learn this language?" or "Have you studied this one?" And one of the ones that he claims that he recently has received a lot of attention on recently is Farsi. And he's like, you know, I'm interested in Farsi, but I'd like to use Farsi to actually make a visit to Iran. And he's like, I don't think I can realistically go to Iran right now because then I'll get hassled when I visit the US. And he visits the US on a regular basis. And I read this comment here, and what he says is like, I think this is a woman maybe that says, yeah, like visa free to the US is in doubt for some people now. Um, Many registrations are required for all tourists. Uh, some tourists, you know, have had to give their fingerprints away even prior to the new, most recent Trump, you know, presidency. Border checkpoints and airports are now far stricter, with mandatory searches and confiscation of electronic devices for inspection, which then determines whether or not entry is permitted. That's interesting. I don't even know if this is true or not, but it says also deportation is not the only option. Arrest and detention is now a reality, and this seems to be at the discretion of the border control in the U.S., even if the visitor has all their correct documentation. Australia has issued travel warnings for the USA, first time in history. Consider your plans carefully. Avoid taking your device or use a burner phone for your trip to the US, especially if you use social media. Your details are not safe and the phone might be searched. And this was a comment specifically related to how Peter would like to study Farsi more and, you know, be able to visit Iran with his Farsi language skills and communicate with locals. And he's like, yeah, but I can't go because, you know, I'll probably get hassled when I visit the US on a regular basis. So I thought that was this comment, if it's truthful, is mind blowing. I'm not sure how truthful it is or how accurate it is. I also know that the the actual situations for USA citizens has at least slightly changed. I believe starting in December of 2021, USA citizens no longer receive stamps in their passports when they fly back into the US, which to me seems like an actual loosening of things in some ways. I'm sure there's a
Yeah.
record of the person's entry being stored somewhere, in this case, a USA citizen. But if things like this comment are true and accurate, it seems like maybe some of the requirements for USA citizens have gotten looser in recent years, but for tourists, maybe in some ways things have gotten more tight. I don't know. I mean, do you have any thoughts about this?
Well, I've had my fair share of encounter with the US border. I also lost my ESTA privilege in 2011 because of I wanted to study in the US without having a valid student visa. And then I lost my visa waiver privilege. I actually got deported back to Switzerland. So that was a very nerve-wracking time for me. I thought I will never be able to come back to the US, and back then the US was my dream destination for everything. But eventually, a year later, I got to the embassy. I got a visa without any problems, 10 years. And I recently renewed it 3 years ago in 2022, again, without any problems. But this was also in the Biden administration era. I also entered the US during the first Trump administration era, which was the easiest time for me ever to go to the United States. Usually, because I go into the US, I always get second inspected because I no longer have the ESTA privileges. But back then, I didn't get asked a single question. They stamped my passport and I got let in. That was at LAX, port of entry. Last year, just like literally days before the election happened, I went to Miami. I got a regular second inspection, but just like the usual questions. I don't know how it is right now. I tend to avoid the USA because it spikes my cortisol, to be honest. I really I don't like traveling to the US for that reason, but I understand how border agents usually work because you have last time I encountered three specific types of border agents. The first one is the one who asks, who is like, okay, well, who is this guy? He's like doing the, the due diligence, basically, the proper due diligence, but in a very kind of suspicious way, where you're getting treated like semi-criminal, I would say. But then the second person I encountered, he was the asshole. He's trying to just, you know, to get on your nerves. You have to stay calm. Don't try to be like an asshole yourself. Don't try to be a smart ass or anything like this. Just respect the authority and go along. And then I got in with the third inspector, and he was just like checking boxes. What are you doing in the US? Conference. Okay. How long? Until then. When are you leaving? Then with X, Y, Z. Okay, stamp. Get it. No problems. So, but that was again during Biden administration. So
Right.
I think it has changed definitely. But just be respectful. Just have everything ready. Respect the authority. You have to you have to do sometimes a little bit of an ego boost to some of these border agents. To be honest, it's just what it is. If you can start arguing and then you get deported anyway. But what's the point? Just
Right.
play this game. I know it's stupid, but
And in your situation there that you're referring to, when you had, I believe it was three different people at the same time or on the same day, were they just asking questions, or did they actually want to like go through your bags or something like this as well, or like really get detailed?
no, no going into bags or looking at the smartphone. What I did is that, but the third one, the checking the boxes, he was very specific. He asked me, "Are you going for business or for work?" And this is very crucial that you answer this properly with saying business, not work, because if you say work, boom, they got you. Because then they ask, "Well, do you have a work permit?" And then you have to backtrack and say, "No, I'm going for a business conference." And then usually how the conversation would go, why didn't you say business? So let me check everything now. So you have to be very precise with the wording here, again, because it can really upset them easily. And he asked me specifically, he said, business. I said, yes, business. And he literally had like the stamp in his hand and then boom, made like this. Go
Right.
ahead.
Right. He's like,
So,
please say the right thing here so I can give you the stamp as I'm ready to do it.
yes, correct. That's exactly what happened here. Yeah.
Right. Now, I want to rewind there because this is a really good anecdote. This your personal journey here to the U.S. Some years ago. You mentioned 2011. Is that correct?
Yep.
And that was
Sorry, 2011. Yes, that was
what
when I got. Yeah, that's when I got back to Switzerland
wasn't that
with the same
wasn't that
plane.
during the
I think that,
Obama administration, or am I mistaken?
yes, correct. Yeah, that was during full-time Obama administration. I mean, it was a lawful deportation. I didn't have a student visa. I abused back then the system. Um, Unknowingly, I was 17. I was still a minor. I'm still thinking about maybe if I can, with a legal attorney or something, I can reinstate ESTA, but because I was a minor back then, and if it's actually applicable in that situation. But I think like, okay, well, I'm fine with the 10 years visa, as long as I just have my proper documentation. I do everything. I have always a return
Right.
flight booked. I always have the hotels booked in advance. Most importantly, always the return. And this goes with any border agent worldwide. It's a universal thing. Um, just be a little bit smart about what you do. Just have a return, because what the border guards essentially look for is: are you spending time illegally here, or is the risk of overstaying, do you owe taxes? These are like the two crucial things that they essentially want to know about you. If these two things are clear, there is no issue with getting into any country ever, as long as you have, of course, the proper visa, etc.
Right. Or visa free or some sort of electronic travel authorization or
Yeah,
whatever.
even if visa free, I mean, even if it says visa free, some countries they will ask you for, okay, well, do you have a return flight?
Right.
Sometimes this happened for frequent travelers, for example, to Southeast Asia because they were abusing the system. Then they started overstaying, which then triggers taxation in these countries.
Right. And the thing about return tickets is actually an interesting topic because it's something that I've actually done myself as well in years past, even with visa-free access to various destinations. I've gone out of my way to make sure that I have return airfare, not just for me, but for also for my family members as well. And so it's been some additional expenses, but it's yeah it preemptively eliminates problems. Um,
And it also depends with which passport you travel on. I mean, if I go to, for example, to Thailand with this, nobody's going to ask questions. But if I go to Thailand with this, they
right.
want to ask, they want to know, well, are you trying to overstay? Are you trying to, abuse the system? So it
Absolutely.
also depends a little bit on this.
Absolutely.